Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 15th, 2012. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, Chris Colby, editor of Brew Your Own magazine, and I launched the next BYO Basic Brewing Radio Collaborative Experiment. Does racking your beer into a secondary fermenter affect your brew? Also, we get some tips on shaving time off your all-grain brew day. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And our 2012 Brewer's Logbooks are still in stock. They are going, but they are still in stock now, so act now. You can you can track 50 batches of beer in this wonderful book that Steve designed. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook, facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us first, and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we greatly appreciate your support. Really easy to do, and it don't cost you anything extra. And now there is an Amazon.co.uk link on there, too. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on the site. You can also find our Basic Brewing iPhone and Android apps in their respective stores. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, too, and we're on Stitcher as well, the Stitcher application. And while I'm still in the shameless plug of portion of the program, I want to let you know that we have new Basic Brewing shirts. We've replaced the old full-color logo shirts and now have a single-color logo version. Now, these are done with a direct-to-shirt printing process, and I'm told that they will last longer than the old-style transfers. We got your black, we got your brown, we got your gray, and a military green color as well. So check those out at basicbrewingshop.com. We have news from Wisconsin and the efforts to make it legal for homebrewers in that state to take homebrew out of their houses and share it with other people in other places. But Kyle Clark says that it's frustrating news. Kyle says SB 395 has one last gasp left for this legislative session. As I write this email, it is 4 a.m. Wednesday in Wisconsin, and the Assembly has just adjourned for the day. The session started at noon. I've been watching the Assembly session in Madison with high hopes, Kyle says. While our representatives are working diligently to get all the bills passed that are currently on the docket, there are 67 left to be covered on the last day of the legislative session. SB 395 was one of the 27 that were pushed off today's Tuesday/Wednesday docket and delayed to Thursday. It is vitally important, Kyle says, that we thank our legislators for their support and strongly encourage the majority party leadership not only to place the bill on the session calendar, but to ensure an up or down vote on the matter. For more information, please visit the Wisconsin Legislature website at legis, that's legis.wisconsin.gov. There are links to view the bill history as well as the contact information for all the legislators, including the leadership in each house. Kyle says, I hope to have good news for you next week. Well, I hope you do too. Very frustrating for Kyle and the other Wisconsin homebrewers who've been working so hard to get this legislation passed and signed, and I hope the next time that I hear from Kyle, he will have good news. Speaking of next week, I'm going to take next week off from posting this podcast. It's going to be spring break here, and my family wants me to do something else with them. So that's where I'll be. The kids are growing up fast, and they won't want to hang around with their mom and dad for much longer, so I'm going to take part while I can. And I hope you get to spend some time with your loved ones, too. So we'll just take a one-week break next week. Let's take a look into the mailbag. Bob from Vancouver in Canada writes, just finished listening to the latest episode, March 8th, 2012, Solera Tasting, Part 1, and heard your comments about dried elderflowers turning hay-like. As an alternative, one might consider trying the Saftfleder elderflower syrup from IKEA, or the Saint Germain elderflower liqueur from the local liquor store, or even mixing a combination of both. I haven't tried it in beer yet, but my partner enjoys both mixed together with club soda. The IKEA elderflower syrup doesn't appear to have preservatives, so it could probably be added at the end of a boil or directly into the fermenter. It might be a good addition to a Berliner Weiss as an alternative to Woodruff or raspberry syrup. The Saint Germain would probably be best blended with finished beer. Well, cool. That's a fun idea. Thanks, Bob. I feel kind of bad for letting those elderflowers dry out like I did, but I did use half of what I had initially received from a listener, and I thought I was going to use the rest in something interesting, but you know how it goes. There's always something else. And I didn't want to just use them on something ordinary, and I wound up not using them at all. So that's just the way life goes, at least my life. A couple of follow-ups on the Trube experiment. Mike Dupong from Twin Falls, Idaho writes, just a little note concerning the Trube experiment. I was sick with a cold when it came time to taste this cream ale, so I couldn't until yesterday. I consider the beer to have enough time in the bottles to age, so I no longer have concerns about young flavors amplifying or muffling the Trube effects. Mike says, I got to say, wow, there's an obvious difference in aroma and flavor. The Trube Plus beer being inferior for this style. There's a certain funk that is disagreeable, and it's rather hard to put my finger on. It's not obviously yeasty. It's not obviously hoppy. It's just obviously funky, which is how I was described in the 70s. Mike says, when I let the two beers warm up, the differences were even more obvious. I was simultaneously elated and disappointed. Elated because the differences were so eye-opening, and I just learned something. Disappointed because now I know half the batch isn't as good as the other. And Jeff Karpinski from Aurora, Colorado writes, heard back from both my friends that I gave bottles of the Black IPA to. They knew the experiment, but were totally blind as to which bottles were which. Both preferred the clean wort version, saying the hops were cleaner but less harsh. One also called the Trube version muddy tasting. So 2 more votes for the non-Trube versions of the experiment. I need to check mine out again to see how they're aging and maybe do a blind test this time. It all makes me look forward to our next collaborative experiment, this one on using a secondary fermenter. Is it necessary or not? Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
You ready to start a new experiment?
Am I?
Now, this is
I just got the last one done like 2 weeks after the deadline.
Well, this is a little similar to one of, if not the first one that we did. One of the first ones we did was leaving your beer on the primary yeast for an additional 2 weeks. And this sounds similar to that, but it's different. You want to talk about what we've got going on?
Yeah, similar but different. This one, what we're doing is we're testing the idea of does adding a secondary fermentation to your beer help? And by secondary fermentation, we basically mean you take your beer, you rack it to another carboy and let it settle. It's, as everyone knows, there's secondary fermentation. It's not a reawakening or a restarting of any fermentation. That's just what they call it. And so our idea was, some people, some homebrew sources say, like, oh, you should rack over to secondary, get the beer off the yeast, which is the similarity to the first one. And other people say, no, it's just a waste of time, and also potentially, you're oxidizing the beer a little bit, just moving it to another container. So what we wanted to do is just devise an experiment, and we actually have sort of two different options to do it. An experiment to test does putting your beer through secondary fermentation help it, hurt it, change it in any way?
And when I first started home brewing, racking to a secondary was standard practice. I mean,
yeah, me too.
And it was getting it off the primary yeast, because that was going to ruin your beer immediately. immediately after fermentation, active fermentation stopped, which we proved in our other experiment that was false. And number two, putting it in a secondary fermenter allowed the beer to clear better, and kind of, it made it a better beer in the bottle. But since then, I can't remember the last time that I used a secondary fermenter. No, I take that back. I tried to clear a Belgian where the yeast wasn't flocking out to my satisfaction, and I put it in a secondary fermenter trying to knock that down. And I wasn't sure that I gained anything, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. Am I missing something by not doing employing a secondary fermenter? So what's the structure? How do we do this?
Well, there's two ways you could do this. If you had 3 identical carboys, one thing you could do, brew a batch big enough to fill 2 of them, and then ferment the beer, and for the second one, rack it over to secondary at the appropriate time, depending on how long your fermentation takes. And that's sort of the best option. And you can do this. It would be best to, just as normal practice, it's best to sort of have your carboys mostly full. But you could do this with basically any size batch and just split it into 2 carboys and then rack it into a third. And actually, come to think of it, your third carboy doesn't need to be identical to the first 2, just the first 2. And the first 2 could be buckets too. Mm-hmm. So 2 fermenters and then the secondary fermenter. Split the batch into 2, rack it over. A second option, if you don't have all those things or just want to do it a little bit more simply, is to brew a beer, ferment it out, rack half of it into a carboy, and then let them both sit, and then package them. And in both cases, you would package the beer at the same time because you'd want the overall time. And one's going to sit only in the primary fermenter for, let's just use the example for 2 weeks, and the other would sit, say, in the primary fermenter for a week, then in the secondary a week, and when you package them, you want the beers to be the same age.
Mm-hmm. Now, when should they rack the beer? When should they rack over into the secondary fermenter?
Yeah, that'll be dependent on the yeast strain they use and how their fermentation goes. You should generally, let the beer ferment out, let fermentation, sort of grind to a halt, and maybe let it sit just a day or 2, just to let some of the more major stuff settle out, and then rack it over.
So basically, when the krausen falls back into the beer, maybe a day or 2 after that?
Yeah, give it a day, give it 2 days, something like that, and then rack it over. Basically, I think that's probably when most people are racking. If you do a secondary fermentation, mm-hmm. that's the way that it used to be explained when to do it. So I'm guessing that's probably how people are doing it. So yes.
So either brew a batch of beer big enough to split into 2 carboys and then rack one of those into another carboy, or do primary fermentation in 1 carboy and rack half of that off into a secondary fermenter, leaving the beer, the rest of the beer in the primary fermenter for the same amount of time that you have it in the secondary fermenter, and then package on the same day. And what are we looking for? What right. Points of data should we be collecting?
Both of those different options will test for, the main option when you, back in the day when the recommendation was there to always do secondary, it was about clarity. So we'll be looking at the clarity of the beer. In addition, we'll do, we'll take the final gravity, we'll, do the taste test or whatever, but primarily this is about clarity, because that's basically what, in the olden times, when this was
10 years ago,
days of yore, when secondary fermentation was sort of de rigueur, it was explained as a way to promote clarity in your beer, and both these either the full, like take 2 carboys and rack into a third, or that one. We'll do the clarity thing. One potential downfall of the easier method of just one carboy is that you normally you wouldn't open up your carboy halfway through, and the time that it would take to rack off something. So you're exposing your beer to oxygen in the second case, whereas in the first case, I mean, you are in the beer you're racking over to secondary, but not in the one that you're leaving in primary. And that is one of the reasons that people argue against racking to secondary, is that there's a little bit of, there's a little bit of contact with oxygen there that you don't get when you just leave it in the carboy. And then there's also people who say it varies from yeast strain to yeast strain. If you have a hard flocking yeast, like if you're using 1968, yeast 1968, that drops out like a rock. There's really no need, like from clarity standpoint, there's no need, I would argue, to do. But sometimes with 1056, that can stay in solution for a time, and this will be my test of it, because I've always wondered, because a lot of times if I'm doing a beer with 1056, I do rack over to secondary, because it seems to me that it stays cloudy, and then I rack it over to secondary, and then it clears up.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's just a self-fulfilling fantasy because it's given time it would have, or what. But now I'll find out, I guess.
So the dual fermenter, if you've got 3 carboys or 2 buckets in a carboy, the preferred method is to do it with 2 parallel fermenters systems going on. But if you don't have that equipment, racking half of the beer off would also be interesting as well. And I assume that you're going to do a blog post on it on
BYO.com.
BYO.com.
I'll put up BYO.com, and we'll list specifically what we want people to take note of, what data to take, and especially we should probably it'd be nice to think of a way to judge clarity, like not just sort of looking at, hey, it looks clear, like like if you can, everyone has pint glasses, maybe we'll think of something like if you can read a pencil through it, or
newspaper or something like that.
Yeah.
So the deadline, we're going to give you plenty of time. I usually take the month of June off on posting podcasts, so let's say May 21st, and that'll give you several weeks to do this. And that way, it would also give us a bit of time if we post this episode on the last day of May. It'll give us time to actually look at the data and come to some, we hope, conclusions.
Yes.
Before we record. So looking forward to hearing what you guys think and what you guys come up with the experiment. Anything else on that before we move to the next topic?
I don't think so. I mean, I would just say for people who they might want to think about which beer they want to brew for this, like the idea, I think, is fairly prevalent that you don't need to do it if you have a yeast that flocculates greatly, but it would be nice to get some data on whether that's true or not. But I think most people will probably want to do it with one of their beers that they've maybe they've done before and took some time to clarify. That would be the strongest test of the question. Would be to pick a beer that sort of has some problems clearing up, and see if secondary helps.
Although it would be interesting to see if there are any detrimental effects, even in a beer where the like if you're using Saf Ale SO4, which falls out like a rock. If racking to the secondary adds some oxidation characteristics or something like that. So,
well, there you go.
Yeah,
you'll just have to do the experiment twice then. I volunteer you to test all the spin-offs.
Now, we've had the suggestion of why don't we use a standard recipe, but I think part of the fun, there are 2 schools of thought. We could say, use a standard recipe. Here it is, and you've got to do this. but there are two schools of thought. I mean, there's one, we may get more uniform data by doing that, or we may not. But if we pick a recipe that people don't like, then we may cut down on participation. And I think it's fun to see differences across the whole spectrum of people brewing the beers that they want to brew and seeing the results that they come up with. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's always, there's a good argument for both ways. One argument you would have against this is that each independent experiment really it doesn't go like 100% of what it should be, because like a full experiment for this, you'd really want to make 4 beers or one wort split into 4 carboys, rack 2 of them over, and then do the test that way. The reason is on a side-by-side, something could happen. The carboy you rack into, maybe you forgot to clean it as well as the others, and it picks up some contamination and turns sour that way. And then you would attribute that, racking your beer makes it sour. It's like, no, it's a fluke event where, if you did it, a 2x2 experiment, you would at least expect that singular mishaps, would become apparent, or at least wouldn't be judged as part of the experimental treatment. And, but the counter argument is that we get, by replicating the experiment with different people, if there is really an effect, it would show up amongst the million. It would crop up out of, the signal would come up out of the noise. And also, it is kind of interesting to see the different, what people are brewing, the differences, and so if anyone doesn't think that the experiment's good enough, please feel free to do an entire huge experiment on your own.
Just share the data with us.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this article. Dave Lowe wrote an article for Brew Your Own magazine on making your all grain brew day more efficient time-wise and making the shortest, most efficient all-grain brew day possible. And he's got some good tips. How would you characterize his philosophy? Is there a way that you could characterize his philosophy, his approach to this, kind of in a nutshell?
Yeah, his basic idea is that there's a set of things in your brew day that are going to take time no matter what. For example, the boil. You have to boil the wort, and that's going to go a certain amount of time. The mash is another one. Lautering, separating the wort from the beer. So there are steps that always are going to take up time, but there are other steps that don't necessarily need to take up time, and you can do things while one step is going on that must be taking up time. You can be doing other things to get ready, and some examples of this. I'm not sure if all these are in the article or not, but just as in general, like as your strike water is heating up, you can be milling your grains at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of people, that's obvious, and they do that. And while you're lautering, you can be heating the wort to a boil, so that like the instant you're done lautering, your wort's boiling. You don't have to wait for all your wort to be collected before you turn on your burner, and just things like that. Basically, and a lot of this is just common sense, and a lot of this also is things that a lot of people do. But the nice thing in the article, he just kind of lays it all out so that you can go and pick your own brew day, think through the all the opportunities to are there steps you can shorten. Are there steps that you're not willing to shorten because there's a trade-off, and just kind of gives you an idea, something to think about when you brew.
He calls it focusing on the critical path. McDonald's would call it time to lean is time to clean. He's saying basically that if you look at your brew day, there is a certain sequence of events that cannot be altered. Heating the water, doughing in, mashing, lautering, boiling, chilling, transferring to the fermenter, pitching yeast. All this stuff has to be done in a sequence, and that takes a specific amount of time. And there are other elements of the brew day that you can fit in there. Like, for instance, like you said, milling your grain while you're heating the water. Those are two things that can be done simultaneously. When I get my boil started, for instance, I start cleaning the mash tun, keeping an eye on the boil at the same time. But then when that's done, chilling, you can be sanitizing your fermenter. So there are things that you can be doing at the same time that other events are going on. It makes it a less relaxing brew day, maybe, but it will be a shorter brew day, and maybe you'll be less tired at the end of it. He says he gets his all grain brew day down to 4 hours. Is that right?
Yeah. In the article, he gives a time example of 3.5, or 3 hours and 45 minutes. And he does it. He does a shorter mash period too, and a shorter boil. Mm-hmm. So like this is when when he's crunched for time and really wants to knock out a batch. And yeah, just slightly under 4 hours from complete. This includes setting up, heating the strike water. He's not starting the clock when right at the mash in or anything. There's including everything from setup, including to putting everything away. So, yeah, and he would describe it as like using the critical path example. He would say, you've got the things that are going to take up time regardless, and those go on your critical path, and the other things that are off your critical path, do those in the downtime, and also like in general, if you were talking about something other than brewing. Any item you can move off the critical path, move that into something that you do while something else is going on. Mm-hmm.
And I guess if you're really crunched for time, you could just do an extract batch. But
sure.
But there's some trade-offs. I mean, we've talked about, I believe, in our mash time experiment, a shorter. If you shorten your mash duration, you might lose some efficiency points. So, there may be a trade-off there.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because like in the article, he talks about shortening the mash time, and that can lower your efficiency. He also talks about shortening the boil and, just adding more, this would work for less hoppy beer styles, but,
mm-hmm.
Just sort of use more finishing type hops to adjust your IBUs, and that's going to change your hop character at a minimum. It's just for a lot of things, like a lot of things in life, it's just what you want to get out of that brew day. If you want to knock out like a 4 or 5 hour brew day, and so I just want to get this beer done, want to get it in the fermenter, you maybe want to do what some of us would think of as cutting corners, but then that's. Maybe you only have 5 hours. Maybe you haven't brewed in months, and you got 5 hours carved out on a Sunday or something, and you don't have any other time. So if that was the case, I'd shorten some things up and get a brew knocked out. But on the other hand, if you have an entire weekend with nothing to do, then have a 12-hour brew day.
Now, there are some disadvantages to shortening your boil time as well. I mean, there are some beers that would lend themselves better to a shorter boil time than others, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
Like, for instance, if you're doing a Pilsner, a Pilsner malt is known for having lots of DMS precursors that you need to. It is said that you need to boil for a longer period of time so that you don't get like a cooked corn or an overabundance of a cooked corn flavor in your finished beer.
Right. So yeah, if you were brewing with very light Pilsner malt, then shortening your boil might not be such an option. But if you're using like pale ale malt that's closer to 3 Lovibond or like Vienna or something, then you wouldn't really have to worry about that. Yeah, there's some beers where you just clarity wise you might want to boil it longer and harder. Yeah, and that's something you'd sort of have to find out on your own too.
He says measure your process. You can't really improve anything unless you know what you're trying to improve. So take notes of your process. How long does each step take? You can improve your equipment. If you're brewing on the stove inside and it takes an hour and a half to get your wort up to boil, you could do what Steve likes to do sometimes, and that is split the boil into 2 pots and use 2 burners to bring up your water up to a boil. You can buy a bigger burner and go outside to get a propane burner and actually upgrade your equipment to make your brew day shorter. You can get a better chiller.
Wort chiller. That's another, especially down here, living in the South, where your groundwater, your tap water, isn't as cold as if you're brewing up in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest things that I learned was getting a pre-chiller that let me get my chilling done a lot faster down here. Just start out chilling with tap water, but have the pre-chiller in line, and then once the wort gets down to a certain temperature where the tap water is not really having much effect anymore, dump some ice in the pre-chiller and let that go the rest of the way.
Or you can use a pond pump like I do after you knock off the initial heat of the wort and recirculate ice water through your wort chiller, and that helps out a lot as well.
Yeah, a nice thing about this article, it kind of meshes with an article I wrote 1 or 2 issues ago about improving your beers, and one of the things I said in there was, take good notes, and one way to do it is to write out what you think you're going to do, and then instead of putting a check mark by it when you're done, put the time by it. And so if you had done that, and then you were interested in speeding up your brew day, you would have already had that information, in your brewing log, and you can go about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of things in this article are somewhat common sense, but I think there are a lot of brewers who will be able to they'll pick up on some bit of something in here, because I know just from, I think it was on Facebook a little while ago, someone was complaining about, or not complaining, but talking about their brew day, and they had just found out the idea of heating their wort as they were collecting it. They were used to collecting the entire wort and then firing up their burner.
Yeah.
And someone mentioned that hey, there's if you collect the wort over, if you're doing continuous sparging and you collect it over 90 minutes, there's no reason that you then need to wait the 10 or 12 minutes that it takes the Cajun cooker or whatever you're using to get that wort up to a boil. Have turn the burner on very low as you start collecting, and just gradually turn it up. And so it's, when I brew, I like to have the boil start like basically the second the laudering's done. It's just, if you were really like pressed for time, you could get the boil started and still be collecting wort too.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing that you can do is, like for instance, I use a water filter on my tap to filter my water, and so it takes some time to get like 9 gallons of water for my brew day. So if I do that the night before, then I don't have to do that on my brew day. So that anything that you can do ahead of time on another day. Like even if you did want to mill your grain ahead of time the day before, you wouldn't have to worry about that on your brew day. You could work ahead and get that done.
If you have the day before, there's lots of little stuff you can do. Even even easy stuff like if you know you have 3 different hop additions, weigh them out and put them in a baggie somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, then on brew day you're not running around looking for your scale, and
You can also gather your equipment ahead of time. If you're like me and you've got stuff stored in different places that you need to bring all together, you could bring it all together ahead of time, and that way it's all set up and you're ready to go. You're ready to hit the ground running. Another thing that I have noticed some people do at the end of the brew day is they don't clean their equipment, and I'm a stickler for cleaning the equipment at the end of the brew day so that it's all ready to go the next time. I think that it would take longer to clean up crusty equipment than it would to clean equipment that is, still wet.
It does. Don't ask me how I know, but yeah.
I mean, you'd be saving yourself some effort and some time as well. If you go ahead, at the end of the brew day, you've probably had a couple of beers, and all you want to do is just, sit in a recliner somewhere and watch the game or watch TV or, whatever you do at the end of the brew day. But I think, at least I enjoy the results of at the very end of the brew day, looking back and seeing that there's nothing to clean at the beginning of the next brew day. And it's also a disincentive if you, at the beginning of a brew day, if you're thinking, man, I'd like to brew, but God, I got to clean all that crap. That's a disincentive to brew. Whereas if you're all ready to go, you're not going to want to procrastinate like me.
No, it is a disincentive if you've got stuff to scrub in your kettle, and maybe your fermenters aren't clean or whatever. Yeah, I would say definitely it's a disincentive, because that's going to take time, and as you say, it's going to take more time. Because you've left it. Mm-hmm. It's going to be harder to clean.
Yeah.
Than if you just it's actually pretty easy on brew day. I mean, I'm lucky now. I've got a tippy dump thing on my mash tun, so cleaning out my mash tun is super easy. But it's really nice not to come back the next day and have to clean out the stinky, how the mash starts to sour overnight. Or, well, maybe you don't, but if you're like me, you do know that the next day you come back and it's oh, that smells sour. So it's nice. And some of this, so a little bit of what we were talking about is just moving some of it to a different day. So you're not really saving time, you're just organizing your time a little bit better.
Right.
But so it's strictly a little bit you're not quite removing stuff from the critical path, you're just moving a bit of the critical path to the day before. But that can help too. For a lot of people, I think the primary reason that an article like this is worthwhile is some people, especially, people with kids typically have to budget their time fairly tightly. And a lot of people these days are just busy, and you might only have a set period of time, every week, or maybe not even every week, but amount of time where you can brew a batch of beer. So gives you something to think about. Where can you shave off time on your brew day, and then it's up to you to say if you want to.
Tippy Dump was my favorite of the Seven Dwarves. You can also look at, if you are a fly sparger or a continuous sparger, you may look at batch sparging or even brew in a bag. The brew in a bag shaves a lot of time off and effort, because you're not cleaning a mash tun. You're just washing out that nylon bag, and it cuts down a lot of time on sparging and lautering. So you may want to, if you were doing one of the more traditional ways of all grain brewing, you might want to look at some of these other methods and give it a try and see if you like it.
Yeah, you can try. The same author, Dave Liu, also wrote an article on no sparge brewing a few issues ago, and that is actually about a year ago. And that's another way that you can speed up your brew day, and it works well, especially if you're making a low gravity. He used it mainly for brewing bitters and stuff. But if you're brewing something that's not, not a barley wine, not something that you're just loading up your mash tun with grains, and you have the room for the extra water in there, going to a no sparge brewing, it can really you can save some time that way. I mean, you can also, even if you're continuously sparging, you can just speed the whole process up.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than collecting over 60 or 90 minutes. You can collect all your wort over a half hour if you want to. All it really is just costing you a few points on the extraction efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can make that up either by once you've done it, you'll know how much you'll know the effect, and you can compensate by adding more grain. But if you don't, you can just take the gravity and spike it with malt extract at the end to get up to what you want.
You can also do smaller batches. I mean, a 2.5 gallon batch of beer takes considerably less time than a 5 gallon batch of beer, because half of the volume of water takes, I don't know if it's half of the time to get up to temperature and to chill down afterwards.
If heating or chilling is a time-consuming step, then yeah, definitely. Scaling your batch down so that you can heat up and cool down quicker.
And there's a graphic that goes, or there's a sort of a sample timeline that goes along with this article as well that you can use as a kind of a guide too.
Yeah, he gives his quick a rundown of his 3 hour and 45-minute brew day. So, which you'd be busy. I mean, you would be. That would be 4 hours basically that you were, doing something. But then again, I mean, when I brew, 8 hours is not unusual at all.
Mm-hmm.
Although I've been doing a lot of like step mashes and sort of longer mashes recently, and I always do a 90-minute boil too, so that adds up. But
one of the trade-offs is with a shorter brew day, a more active brew day, you don't have as much time to visit. So if you've got somebody over at the house brewing with you, it may not be as fun. But if you're brewing by yourself and you want to get it done in a hurry, there are a lot of good tips in this article. Well, very good, Chris. I look forward to getting our data in for this experiment. I look forward to doing it myself and to see if I change my ways again as a result of these experiments.
Yes, I will put up a entry on my blog at BYO.com detailing, writing out the experimental protocol, and also, instructing people on what data to collect, and hopefully we'll get a good response.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Talk to you later, James.
Well, thanks again to Chris Colby. If you click on the BYO banner on basicbrewing.com, you can get a free issue of the magazine, and if you subscribe, you'll be helping to support this show, and I hope I appreciate everybody who's done so far. And I hope you will participate in the experiment. I think we got plenty of time for you to participate and maybe even do a couple of batches to see if the results that you receive from the first are repeated. And the good news is that you get to drink all of the results of your experimenting. Remember, I'm taking off next week to hang out with the wife and kids for spring break. I hope that you will have fun with somebody you care about, too. Not going anywhere interesting or special, but, it's family time. It all counts. In the meantime, if you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site, along with our Brewer's Logbook, which is now available to order, and our new shirts, our new Basic Brewing Basic shirts. We've got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time on our site. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Air Spencer CSX3 Air Freshener, Squash, and Air Spencer was the name of my CIA air airline back in the 70s. No, it wasn't. And Slingshot Flying Pig with oink sound. That's Slingshot Flying Pig with oink sound. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. See you in a couple weeks.